Hey everyone, in today's video, I'm going to take you through the layers of the abdominal region of the body. We're going to talk about the difference between your abdominal muscles and the core muscles. So let's jump straight into the video here. So obviously, when you look at the anatomy at first glance, you can see the most prominent musculature structures, and that would be the rectus abdominis. Now, if we are to hide the rectal sheath, essentially I want to isolate the anatomy of the rectus abdominis, so you can see it right there. So attachment points down here at the pubic bone, and then also the sternum and the 5th to 7th ribs. Okay, so quite high up. A lot of people think that it actually kind of ends down here where you can visibly see the six-pack form, but that's not the case. Now, in terms of movement, we need to look at the motion of the rectus abdominis. It's pretty simple, to be honest. We've got spinal flexion, so they flex the spine forward, which is one of their kind of most basic functions, along with all these other muscles here. So we are going to fade everything around, so you can see like the rectus abdominis performing this movement. Now, what's interesting about the flexion is that a lot of people don't like to do spinal flexion for some reason. And they don't like to do crunches. I personally am a fan of crunches, as long as you really isolate the movement of the spine and not just kind of do it using inertia. Coming back to the other abdominal muscles, we're going to have a look at the external oblique. Now, as you can see, we're kind of going through these, coming from the more superficial layers, and we're going to go a little bit deeper in a second towards the more deeper layers. So the rectus abdominis and the external oblique are the most superficial kind of movers and the most superficial abdominal muscles here. So in terms of the motions of the external oblique, we've got trunk flexion, obviously the same as the rectus abdominis. We've also got rotation and lateral flexion. So we got lateral flexion of the spinal column to the same side. We've also got trunk rotation, which is interesting because it rotates the trunk to the opposite side, as you can see from the diagram. And when it comes to the counterpart, to the external oblique, the internal oblique actually rotates the spinal column to the same side. So you're going to see that in a second when we go a little bit deeper. But as you can see here, the left external oblique rotates the spinal column to the right, so to the opposite side. It doesn't pull the sternum in towards the left side itself. So that's important for us to know if we are assessing like rotation, or we're trying to look for a weakness in any of these muscles. Now, the rectus abdominis and the external oblique are the muscles that essentially form the outer layers of the abdominal region. Now, if we are to look a little bit deeper, we are going to start to look at the muscles of the core, essentially. So in order for us to do that, I need to hide this, and I'm also going to hide the rectus abdominis. The counterpart to the external oblique, the internal oblique, is the muscle that creates, again, trunk flexion. So we've got here on the left-hand side, so flexing the spine forwards. We've got lateral flexion to the same side, the same as with the external oblique. So you can see the diagram there. See, you need to fade all of them so you can see it there, right there. Okay, so you can see how the external oblique covers the internal oblique, but the internal creates the same movements as the external in this situation, so the lateral flexion. But if we're talking about trunk rotation, which is a very important function of both obliques, we've got trunk rotation to the opposite side, like this. I'm going to put the two graphics next to each other now on the screen so you can see how on the left-hand side the internal oblique rotates to the right, essentially where the right internal oblique contracts, and the external oblique is essentially the opposite. So the left or the right external oblique essentially rotates to the opposite side. Okay, so this is interesting to know, and this is how anatomy can sometimes give us some like clues as to what's going on in terms of like muscle weakness and that kind of stuff. And finally, we're getting to the deepest layer of the abdominal region, where the core is essentially completed, and that's going to be the transverse abdominis, which is a muscle that aids in like all these movements that we've discussed so far, the lateral flexion. You can see it kind of clearly there, kind of how it connects down here to the linea alba, and all the way up here into the towards the xiphoid process. This is the only abdominal muscle here that goes as far back as kind of this region of the thoracolumbar fascia. So it kind of wraps around your body like a corset, which is very important to note. And one of the main functions of the transverse abdominis is that they create abdominal pressure. So when you exhale and pull your belly button in, they essentially pull everything inwards, or the organs and that kind of stuff. So it's not just these movements that it creates, it also focuses on the mainly the abdominal content pressure. But again, we've got like, aids in flexion, trunk rotation as well. But it's not really a big mover like some of the other muscles that we've discussed, especially some of the more superficial muscles that essentially create like, some of the bigger movements in this region. So when it comes to the core, I personally like to divide it into the like the outer layer and the inner layers. So the outer layer of the core, or the region of the core, essentially are the rectus abdominis and the external oblique, which are big movers, big muscles. And then the inner layers are made up of the internal oblique and the transverse abdominis. Now we can also talk about the pelvic floor muscles, like down here. All these muscles that essentially create pressure from the bottom upwards. Okay, now they're not really part of the abdominal region as such, so I don't really want to cover them in this video, but I would also consider them as part of the core. And one more muscle that I would also mention here would be the diaphragm. I would personally consider the diaphragm as part of the core because it also creates abdominal pressure. So if we're talking about the internal core, I'm going to include these two other muscles and muscle groups when it comes to the pelvic floor, the perineum and those kind of tissues down there, as well as the TVA and the internal oblique. So it's not just about doing sit-ups and crunches and that kind of stuff. You want to make sure that you load these muscles in rotation, lateral flexion, as well as kind of forward flexion as well. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel for more exercises and anatomy content. If there is anything specific that you would like me to cover on this channel, please let me know in the comments below this video. See you in the next one.